On today's World Insight, China announces it has successfully become a moderately prosperous nation. What is still needed to take China further and become a high-income country?
But now we are aiming at moving China to a new level. In 30 years, China probably is going to become a rich country by today's standards.
And China-U.S. ties have been at their most tense in 40 years. We speak to Neil Bush, founder of the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S. China Relations.
Because of my closeness to China and my being a witness to this incredible transformation over these past 40 years.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. China announced it has completed the goal of building a moderately prosperous society, otherwise known in Chinese as Xiaokang society, in all aspects. Chinese President Xi Jinping, who's also the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China Central Committee, made this announcement during the celebration of 100th anniversary of the founding of the CPC.
在这里，我代表党和人民。
On this special occasion, it's my honor to declare on behalf of the party and the people that through the continued efforts of the whole party and the entire nation, we have realized the first centenary goal of building a moderately prosperous society in all respects. This means that we have brought about a historic resolution to the problem of absolute poverty in China, and we're now marching with confident strides towards the second centenary goal of building China into a great modern socialist country in all respects. This is the great and glorious accomplishment for the Chinese nation, for the Chinese people, and for the Communist Party of China.
Despite disruptions from the COVID-19 outbreak in 2020, China's GDP exceeded 14 trillion US dollars. The country has developed the world's largest social security system and boasts the world's biggest middle-income group. In a historic feat, China has eliminated extreme poverty or absolute poverty. So, what does it mean to achieve a Xiaokang society, especially in a country of 1.4 billion? And where should China go with the second centenary goal of building China into, quote, a great modern socialist country in all aspects, end of quote? Let's loop in our panelists. For more discussion, joining us in Beijing, Yao Yang, Director, China Center for Economic Research with Peking University; David Bartosz, Professor of Beijing Foreign Studies University; in Shenzhen, Xiao Geng, Professor of Peking University HSBC Business School. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. The reason we are inviting a panel that are all residing and working now in Beijing is because this is very much a China related to the world topic. Professor Yao, as an economist, what does it really mean, a moderately prosperous society? Explain to us.
Well, I think it means a lot for the world. China accounts for 70% of the world population. If China can reach a well-off level of living standards, that's a big achievement for humankind, right? So we have eradicated extreme poverty in the last 40 years, and now we are aiming at moving China to a new level. In 30 years, China probably is going to become a rich country by today's standards. That's going to be another great achievement for the whole humankind.
Right. Professor Xiao, tell me in economic terms, what does it really mean? According to the official explanation, that the GDP in 2020 has to double that of 2010. So this is what we are talking about, a moderately prosperous society, mainly from the economic perspective?
I think according to the World Bank, if a country's GDP per capita reaches around 12,000 US dollar, then it's actually close to high income economy. So China is around like 10,000 US dollar right now. So it's very close to enter the low end of the high income economy. So in that sense, the moderate prosperous society is actually close to high income society, but not yet.
Professor Bartosz, of course, according to the explanation, it's not just about material wealth, is it? It is also about many other things. For example, economy, democracy, science, education, culture, society, people's livelihoods, and the list goes on. Now, what kind of standards are we looking at when we say China has already reached the moderately prosperous society?
I think what China has achieved, raising 840 million people out of poverty, is unprecedented in world
Out of
history.
extreme poverty.
Yes, and I think it is a very important step for us to move on towards the overall goal of long-term sustainability. So what we have to achieve on this planet as a humanity as a whole is long-term sustainability. And of course, be able to do that, we have to raise as many people as possible out of poverty, first to create a stable basis, also to create new approaches, social approaches, and also approaches with regard to technology. We see that urbanization is developing. We develop smart cities, cognitive cities, and we have to develop actually a very wise approach, also boost the level of cultural proficiency of people. So to enable as many people as possible to participate in humanistic self-cultivation, collectively, but also individually, to enable as many people as possible to tackle on our future problems.
Therefore, it comes to question how to prioritize, where to start with. That is the most important thing. Professor Yao.
Well, so certainly, as you said, there is a long list, but central to it is still how to continuously raise people's living standards. So income distribution in China is not desirable. Particularly, we have to spend more efforts on the lower ends of income distribution. That's why to continuously develop the countryside is very critical for China's next step. Second, I think China has to take a more international responsibility. China has launched to fighting climate change. One is to peak China's carbon emission in 10 years. Another one to realize net zero in 2060.
Professor Yao, but that is the very difficult task, isn't it? Some would say, as we know that the Chinese first carbon trading market is to begin soon, according at least to the earlier news reports, and also that how to be able to graduate from this period of economic growth to the real higher quality with better sustainable development goals. That is the most crucial issue. Now, Professor Yao, we saw China went through several periods of difficult challenges, but it also brought great results. For example, when China joined the WTO, there were massive layoffs in the state-owned enterprises at that time. Some say what happened then will never be able to be handled now or in the future. So, Professor Yao, looking at these goals, particularly when you say carbon neutral, carbon peak, how is China going to be able to do it? What kind of capital, quote unquote, does this country have now?
Yeah, I think the Chinese government has learned many lessons from the past. So this time you see the government is going to use a mixed strategy to tackle climate change. One, of course, is still administrative. Another one is market-based, like you said. We are setting up carbon trading facilities. We are also using carbon emission tax And internationally, like Europe is going to impose a border tax on carbon emission. I don't think that's bad for China. Actually, that's going to push forward China's innovation. I see that as a good thing for China.
Professor Bartosz, the Chinese Communist Party just celebrated its 100th anniversary. Now, there were a lot of discussion about why and it is still able to achieve many goals it set, both for the country and for itself. How do you see the earlier experiences and lessons will be able to serve the current purposes?
China is a civilization which is constantly learning from its history and constantly trying to evolve and to cultivate the procedures and the approaches towards development. I think this is deeply rooted in Chinese civilization, and it's also been an expression in the development of the policies of the Communist Party of China over the last decennia, and we have seen a constant progress in this regard. And I think what we have to envision here, or what we might have to assume with regard to the future, is we are seeing a world shifting change in technologies, in industries. We are approaching the horizon of Industry 4.0 and also the context of an artificial intelligence-based second nature, so to speak, of our city environments. And I think this will completely change also our way of life and also our kind of work. So we have to ask ourselves, what kind of work will be left for humans to do, and what can we do with our all of the free time that we gain? How should we invest the energies? And I think we need this new space for enabling ourselves to be creative, to tackle all the future problems.
There are a lot of things going on right now that is, some could argue, different from earlier periods, particularly, for example, at the very beginning of reform and opening up. First of all, geopolitics, China-U.S., whatever you want to have it, competition/rivalry, as some describe it. Then there's also the issue of the pandemic. It is still in front of all of us. Third, we're also seeing China, its economy in transition. Now, we have never been able to test it, but we are trying to be able to experiment. So, Professor Xiao, you know what I'm talking about. There's a whole bunch of unprecedented situations facing China today. So, Professor Xiao, what can China rely on?
China did very successfully in the past in terms of basic needs and also industrialization, urbanization. You know, we solved the problem of clothing, food, housing, travel, and also education and jobs. But what we are facing now is really what I call global and national security, and also the happiness for the people. So these are really serious challenges. And this is closely related to both domestic and international role, you know, of the government, and also how to motivate people to work, but also how to, you know, have a peaceful and normal, you know, relations with the rest of the world. So that's why I think the past experience in China, I think the key is that both the government and the market played a very, very important role, you know, in the last years. So I think that's the key.
Professor Yao, your thoughts about this? I mean, if you look at China today, there are several things, as we said earlier, but particularly what is going to be the role of the private sector? For example, this has been a debate for a long time, particularly now. And also, how is China going to prosper in terms of geopolitics regarding technology and also innovation? So, Professor Yao, your thoughts?
Well, I think geopolitical competition is there, that we shouldn't exaggerate its impacts. look at the U.S. China economic relations, particularly in the financial sector, you see the two countries have come together more closely than before. Many people don't realize how many Chinese companies have gone to U.S. stock market to get listed over there over the last 2 years. The number is increasing quite dramatically. In the same way, we have seen a lot of American investment coming into China, right? So, the economic currencies under the water are much stronger than we have believed.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the American restriction on export of technology to China, I don't think United States is going to succeed. China has developed its own technologies, and China will continue to do it. Let me just read the 3 examples in which China actually has a lead in the whole world. One is AI. No country can match China in terms of application of AI. So China and the U.S. leads the area of AI. The second is solar power. Even the U.S. cannot match China in this field. Solar power installation in the world, China contributes to 1/3 of it. China also contributed 3/4 of solar panel equipment. Okay, and the third one is electric vehicles. China's sales accounts for almost 40% of world total, and China has advantage in battery technologies. In all the 3 technologies, China leads the world, and those 3 technologies, I believe, are going to lead the world economy in the next 10 to 20 years.
Professor Xiao, we are seeing some very interesting situation there. Graduating from the moderately prosperous society to the next goal in 30 years when China, the PRC, is celebrating 100th anniversary. This coincides with the competition period of China and United States, at least for the first 10 to 15 and 20 years. So how do you see that taking place with what Professor Yao just mentioned about China's advantages?
I think the foreign policy actually started at home. So I think the competition between China and the United States really, in the future, depends on how each country solve their domestic problem. And I think China has a huge advantage because in the past, the government focused on people's happiness, people's living standards, and the bottom group of Chinese people's living standards are increasing dramatically, even though the inequality also appears. And also, I think we can see from the how we deal with the pandemic. So the U.S. China relation, I think after a while, both countries will realize the cooperation is necessary. Basically, the two countries can learn tremendously from each other if they focus on people instead of what we call the capitalist. So I think here is really a test. And in today's world with the technology, particularly military technology, if the two countries start to fight, then we are all going to be destroyed. So I think we are at the crossroad. Basically, the two countries needs to think very clearly about our future, particularly our future generations, because we are really living in a global village now.
What about some of the domestic issues? Since you say everything started from domestic politics and domestic issues, private sector discussion has been a long one in China, and that discussion has been infiltrating into every kinds of multilateral negotiations regarding WTO and many others. So what do you see is the direction that China is taking?
Well, I think in the last 40 years, the biggest achievement of China is really introducing the so-called modern corporation, which is very much a market economy. So the private sector is really vibrant in China, and also very much now competing with the global, companies in the private sector. So I think the trend is that the global supply chain, all those market mechanisms is going to be in China and basically doing very well, with the international market. What the difference is, the role of the government and also the state-owned enterprise, that I think will have a lot of change. Basically public infrastructure and the climate change and also public health. Those are the areas, state-owned enterprise can play the role together with the private sector. I think this is the area all the other countries, the whole world needs to focus on in the future. It will, be necessary.
Professor Yao, same question.
I don't think there is a policy change in China toward the private economies. But in terms of WTO reform, I think China can adopt something like the European practice, that is to adopt so-called competition neutrality. Means when the government gives out order, it doesn't care whether the company is state-owned or privately owned.
Last round, before we go, very briefly from every one of you, what do you see as the biggest task in front of us from China in terms of graduating from the moderately prosperous society to the next stage? Professor Yao, one sentence.
Well, I think the current biggest challenge is to peak carbon emission in 10 years. That's a daunting task.
Professor Bartosz.
I think we all have to learn that sharing means gaining. That's very important. We have to, especially outside of China, I think in Chinese civilization, it's already very well understood that we have to share the work, but we also have to share the outcome. This is very natural common sense in China, but unluckily not everywhere. And I think we have to work on the integration in this regard of the biosphere, the noosphere, the sphere of mind, the technosphere, the geosphere, and the atmosphere. And we have to do that together. We have to share this work, and we have to be confident that sharing the work will also lead to sharing the outcome justly. The key
Professor Xiao.
Well, I think the key is to focus on the people's happiness, and both the private sector, the market, and the government, the SOEs, they all need to focus on the people's happiness.
Thank you so much for every one of you for providing us with a lot of food for thoughts. Yao Yang, David Bartosz, Xiao Geng, really appreciate it. Thank you. You're watching World Insight. Coming up, China-U.S. ties have been at their most tense in 40 years, some argue. We speak to Neil Bush, founder of the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S. China Relations. Coming up.
Because of my closeness to China and my being a witness to this incredible transformation over these past 40 years.
Welcome back. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. As one of the most important bilateral ties in today's world, China-U.S. relations has been characterized by the integration of goods, capital, technology, and people for 40 years. And today, it is at a key crossroads, many believe. So how can the two countries engage in dialogue instead of conflict? I asked this question and many more to Neil Bush, founder and chair of the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S. China Relations, the third of 5 children of President George H.W. Bush. For the past 25 years, Mr. Neil Bush has engaged in various international business development activities with a focus on China. He first visited China in 1975 when his father was the chief liaison officer representing the United States in Beijing. Since 1975, Mr. Bush has traveled to China over 140 times and has visited over 40 cities. Let's invite his wisdom. Mr. Bush, what a pleasure to see you. It really takes a lot of courage, one would assume, Mr. Bush, to once again accept our interview on a media based in Beijing, particularly when it comes to China-U.S. relations.
And I feel very comfortable with this topic. I'm not a foreign policy expert. I'm not an analyst, but I spent a lot of time in China over the past 40 plus years. And I've seen China's rise from a kind of a front row seat. I think I have a different perspective than most Americans because of my closeness to China and my being a witness to this incredible transformation over these past 40 years.
You have a Bush Foundation on U.S. China Relations. If you look at the recent U.S. media coverage, your family has been accused once and again of soliciting money coming from the Chinese Communist Party. But in fact, you argued that it is a cooperation with a long-time friendly or association, China-U.S Exchange Foundation. Tell me more about that, and how do you feel about this media, shall I say, hype of the story?
Yeah, first of all, the Bush China Foundation was formed, the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S. China Relations was formed during my father's lifetime. He's had a passion for building better and closer ties between China and the United States. And he believed at his core that having communication and dialogue and building understanding through respectful exchanges and that kind of thing, were the way to go. So with his blessing, we formed the Bush China Foundation. One of our funders, we get funding from U.S. companies and from the Chinese side. In this case, the CUSEF, the China-U.S. Exchange Foundation, is run by C.H. Tung. C.H. Tung is an old family friend. He was obviously a leader of Hong Kong when the Hong Kong transition to China took place and did a fabulous job in that role. Yes. He cares deeply about the U.S. China relationship, and CUSEF itself supports many organizations, think tanks, and foundations throughout the world, and especially in the U.S. He's a great guy, and there's nothing. We're not apologetic at all about receiving funding from C.H. Tung. The criticism of us, which I haven't seen much of, frankly, there's a small cabal of folks out there that might be looking for things like this, but the criticism of us comes from a very narrow interest that want to find wrong in anything that is pro better understanding and closer ties.
Because we already have this pandemic for more than a year, so it's very hard for people from both sides to travel to one another and anywhere else in the world to meet. So tell us more about your feeling. What is the temperature right now?
Pretty obvious to me as an observer that the feelings towards China among the political elite especially have become very toxic. And I have a feeling there's a lot of polling out there, but it's very sad to me to see. I'm hopeful that this new administration, will move in the direction of at least establishing more regular dialogue, which leads inevitably to better understanding and a lowering of tensions. And so far, they're off to a much better start than the past administration, in my opinion. So we'll see where it goes from here.
5 months already into the office. Do you see that is happening, or things are getting even worse?
I think it's getting better. I think it's inevitably going to get better for this next 3.5 years in the remaining term of Joe Biden. Areas that have been identified for collaboration. The Biden administration has clearly stated there's areas where we compete, and instead of hyping or harping only on the allegations of China's abuses of the international economic system, America is now gearing up to compete. We're starting to put money together to become leaders, or to stay as leaders and to continue to lead in areas of technology, AI, and the various technologies that are, kind of creating all kinds of opportunity in the future. So I think there's a lot of really good signs. There have been a lot of good signs coming out of the very first few months of this administration. My greatest hope is that, again, through closer contact and dialogue, that eventually, we're going to see the political elite move to understanding that this relationship has been critically important over the past 30 years for our economic development in the United States.
Right.
It's helped to lift 600 million people out of poverty in China. And so there's been a tremendous bilateral benefit to our relationship, and that with the world as close as it is today, as connected as we are, that it would be a travesty to decouple or to enter into some kind of a Cold War phase, or to try to, I think the political elite's going to see that that we're better off national security wise and economically by having ties.
However, many here are wondering whether Washington today, with its complicated domestic politics, are trying to rally the country with the use of China, even though very negative, in a negative way, to rally the country to unite together because there's something called the China threat. And it might be useful for Washington. However, it is very unfair for China. Mr. Bush, your thoughts?
This falls into the Thucydides trap argument, which, if you've read Graham Allison's book,
talked to Professor Allison many times.
Yeah, the book is very, I'd highly recommend it to my American, I do recommend it to my American friends.
And even in his book, he suggests that it's important to learn the lessons of history and therefore to avoid it rather than repeat it.
Yeah, of course. And we're living in a modern era where it seems crazy to be moving towards conflict. I mean, we're all adults, we're all mature, we live on the same planet, we share a common humanity, and it doesn't make sense that we would want to establish an aggressive posture towards China or any other country unless there's good cause to do so. And so it gets to the question of intentions, but the Thucydides trap suggests that as a country rises, the established power feels threatened. And then because of the fear of that rise, there are all kinds of propaganda and assertions and assumptions made about the intent of the rising power that lead to misunderstanding. And that miscalculation or misunderstanding in history has led to conflict. And we just need to avoid that. So yeah, I'm really worried that the rise is being used, that China's rise and the fear of China is being used to help, you say, unify the country. I think it's more basic politics. I think it's more about getting reelected in the local district. If you're a China basher, that means you're against the communists and you're for democracy and for freedom, and therefore you're going to be I'm going to vote for you.
No matter how much China showed gestures and made progress, it's not likely to change the political rhetorics inside Washington because they're going to continue to use that. And they need that for either their district elections or the midterm or eventually another presidential election. So that actually discouraged a lot of Chinese who have been very instrumental about this relationship over the past decades. Mr. Bush.
Yeah. No, I can imagine them being discouraged, but there had been so much interaction and so much connectivity between China and the United States, between Chinese students, for example, who have come to America and returned to China. Some have stayed, but because of these interactions, business-wise, tourist-wise, student-wise, there's going to be more and more understanding that establishes from basic human connection, just from being in the same dorm as a student from China, or, when you interact with Chinese business people the way I have over many years, you get to see these individuals as humans that are, like me, like you, like us, being kind and generous towards others and that kind of thing. I don't know. I'm hoping that the political incentive or motivation will be dampened by the reality that this connectivity between China and the United States has benefits all of us, and that there's not a threat, that we're not explicitly being threatened by China in any way. There are things that we're going to harp about issues, and that's normal. That's a natural thing. Friends have disputes, and they resolve these disputes, through dialogue and better understanding. So it shouldn't lead to conflict. It shouldn't lead to a separation or decoupling or Cold War type outcome. Is the bottom line. We should be moving towards working together to solve major challenges and towards a universal understanding of what the rules are that need to be applied as we approach, various aspects of interacting with each other and with other countries.
We see a tendency, in fact, among many major players in the world, inside their domestic politics, trying to romanticize Cold War or rivalry. I mean, your family, starting from your father to your brother and to you, I'm sure have all witnessed part of that history. And as a family with quite a number of well-known politicians, how do they characterize Cold War? How do you understand Cold War? And if people are dragging us, to Cold War or the edge of it, what should we do?
Yeah, it just seems crazy to enter into a phase of a Cold War. It doesn't make any sense. If you think about this simple statistic, in 2019, there were 169 million outbound flights by Chinese, outbound, and it was defined as being anywhere from China, mainland China, 169 million. And some people travel multiple times, so I don't know, it's tens of millions of people, were flying out. How can you have a Cold War where that many people are leaving and coming back to China all the time? How can you have a Cold War where our economies are so deeply intertwined? And for the trade war to have started under the last administration, it was crazy to suggest that we were going to bring jobs back to the United States. We were at full employment when the tariffs were put on. He says they claim they were going to create more manufacturing. We lost more manufacturing jobs. The trade deficit went up. The taxpayers, or the consumers of the United States, paid for those tariffs. Yeah. It was a stupid idea, and it was a step towards It was kind of a step towards Cold War, but it was a step that was a misstep, clearly a misstep. And I'm hoping the Biden administration will see it as a mistake, because our countries are much better off, not building a wall between us, but rather breaking that wall down, creating more transparency, enforcing rules as it relates to intellectual property protection and human rights issues and those kinds of things. And where there are criticisms of the United States, we address those as well. But we need to move forward together with walls being torn down rather than built. I am an unabashed believer that globalization has helped America tremendously over the past 40 years, especially the last 20 or 30 years. And our biggest partner in the world of globalization has been China. And to destroy that, or to build a wall between us, to establish a Cold War type environment between us, it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's so illogical to me personally.
Mr. Bush, I want to let you know that many here in China have been very reminiscent of the days when the two countries were having constructive relationship with one another, and be able to, at different stages, be courageous enough to face up to those challenges, and be able to build the relationship even further on top of those challenges. So that shows leadership. I really wonder, after living in the same family with many of your leaders, your father, your brother, to you, what is leadership? Political leadership, business leadership?
Yeah, leadership to me is about, being respectful of others, putting yourself in the other guy's shoes, building consensus around what's obvious to be the right direction to go. And sadly, politics interferes, with true leadership. Statesmanship type leadership transcends politics. It says, I don't really care what people think at the end of the day. We're going to lead what they think by doing what's right. And my father, every step of the way, did what was right. So I'm really proud of that. My brother George did the same. My brother Jeb, as governor of Florida, was an extraordinary leader in Florida. So yeah, I've had some pretty good role models for leadership.
Tell me more about your family, Mr. Bush. How much, and your relations with China, personal relations. When you grew up, when did you travel to China? What was your impression? And when was your last trip?
The reason I have such strong feelings about China is that I was in China in 1975 when my father was, quote unquote, the bicycling ambassador. And I witnessed firsthand a China that is very, very different than today. And in fact, today's China was unimaginable in 1975. And so the people in China were very friendly towards us. There were very few long-nosed white guys riding bicycles down the streets of Beijing.
Was it fun when you were a little kid and riding the bicycle in Beijing? Do
Oh,
you still
it was
remember
great.
the roads? Which stretch is the most interesting? Which corner do you enjoy?
We used to love riding our bikes, down the main street to get to the Tiananmen Square, for example. Yeah, exactly. No, it was great. We had Peking duck. My dad established a great love for Peking duck. He really loved China, the Chinese people, and that kind of thing. And since his retirement from the presidency, to see China rise was something that brought him great joy. My dad was never afraid of the China's rise.
Looking forward to the day you and your whole family could travel to China again, and maybe Peking duck, maybe bicycles, maybe just talking to the friends in the summer
I doubt
breeze.
I'd be riding too many bicycles. The streets are filled with cars, and it wouldn't be the same anymore.
It might be different. It might be different.
I'm definitely looking forward to coming back.
It was such a pleasure talking to you. And many of your friends, I'm sure, in China and beyond miss you here. And I'm sure that trip will be done, hopefully soon. Neil Bush, talking about his personal stories with China and what he believes is a strong commitment of he and his family in seeing China's rise. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.